Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, can I now please have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Tom, Councillor Peary, any questions about the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? Fantastic. First up is determinations of items requiring separate discussion. I will start on my left with Councillor Peary. Nothing? Councillor Kim?
Item 6.
Anything else? No? Councillor Tom? Item 15. Councillor Humphreys?
Item 13.
Thank you. Councillor Abel? Nothing? Mayor Daw? You covered. Councillor Gardner?
1 and 2. And actually, Mr. Chair, if it's possible, I might be leaving early this evening. If we could bring item number 15 forward.
I'm sure council will be happy to accommodate you. Councillor Marcus? Great. Just to review, we have items 1, 2, 6, 13, and 15 that have been pulled this evening. Any other items? Seeing nothing else, may I have a motion to adopt the items not requiring separate discussion? Councillor Peary, Councillor Maracus, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Perfect. We have one delegation this evening. We have Mr. Dennis Van Decker. Could you please state your name and your address, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. My name is Dennis Van Decker. I'm a resident of 11 Noden Crescent in Aurora. Actually, the pictures up here on the presentation right now are of our property, and I submit to the council tonight that this should become the standard for properties in Aurora. Solar on the roof, solar in the walls, arguably the first LEED Platinum residence in the Aurora. Food grown in the front yard through perennial berries, gardens throughout the place. This is just one of the properties that your bylaw department feels is not up to snuff and worthy of prosecutions in the order of $100,000 in years of time. Next slide. Sorry, just I'm a little nervous. I should say I wanted to say also, just as a matter of background, who I am. Been a resident for 14 years with my wife Anne Marie and our 6-year-old son, who is also here tonight. I'm an engineer, entrepreneur. I install solar systems. I've lived the green life for a long time. I used to be a Green Party member of written policy for the federal Green Party. I live my life as a green person. This property you're looking at actually here has 9 composters on it. You're talking about composting and diversion. This should be the model that should be used. From the point of view of involvement in processes such as this, I used to actually be on the Committee of Adjustment 8 years ago. I was a vice chair. I was also a president of my University Engineering Society with a management science minor. So when it comes to analyzing management situations in the bylaw department, I'm more than just a victim. I'm calling it a victim of ill. Ill as in it's illegal. You'll notice I refer to ill a few times here, and that's the problem we have here. We have a bylaw department that's ill. The core issue here is it's a police force. That's what we have here. It's a police force. It's a police force that has extraordinary powers, more than normal police. They can enter a backyard without a warrant. I'm sure you all know that. I've actually asked 20 different residents of Aurora. Nobody knows this. It's a surprise that they have this sort of power. There's no political oversight. Anytime I've talked to each one of you over the last 3.5 years at many community events, you've always told me it's ill. There's minimal to no management. I met Mr. Narozny here one night when my wife was charged again after we were found not guilty and then charged again. Came here and talked to Mr. Narozny that night. Was trying to talk to anybody for some sanity. I found out that he can't interfere. There's no oversight. Also, I've now found out that the way that these people get billed, the legal department, I've been having an ongoing discussion with the prosecutor over the last 3 years. He keeps saying, my hands are tied. I know this is ridiculous. I got to proceed. My client's proceeding. I didn't actually know what that actually meant. So I peeled back the layers. What that actually means is you don't have this typical situation where you have a Crown prosecutor who's part of the same government body and there's prosecutorial discretion. No, what we have here in Aurora, as you probably all know, is you pay the bill. If you don't use the services very much, you don't pay the bill. There's an opportunity to save a lot of money right here. Also, it leads to moral hazard, where we have uncontrolled bylaw officers who have control of a virtually unlimited legal budget. You're going to just keep paying the bill. It isn't like we got no more lawyers. It isn't like you can execute prosecutorial discretion. My hands are tied. Your hands are tied. Everybody's hands are tied in this lovely circle of ill. There's no internal affairs on this police department, no complaint process. Got great cost, which is leading into my next point here. And what I've done here is I have 8 issues over my summary slides. 16 recommendations of actions. I've tried to, because I only have 5 minutes, to distill this very precisely. There's 20 pages actually in this presentation where each of these issues is discussed in detail. And this is all within the context of ill. If somebody actually had a backbone to get away from ill, we could talk about this in much more detail and specifics. That's what I suggest council needs to do in this case. But let's start with costs of prosecutions. What I think, this is significant. I estimate in the case with my wife over $120,000. $120,000. 3 people go to court every time, 21 court appearances. Got 22nd coming on Thursday. There needs to be a review of this. The taxpayers should be demanding it. Hopefully the press will be demanding it. We need to look at the department, the costs and the statistics, I suggest, over the last 5 years, and also quarterly public disclosure, second action, published on the website. You can anonymize the detail, but there has to be some accountability. There's no accountability in here at all. There has to be at least cost accountability to start the process of reform. Third action, you got to just reduce their budget. I think you can reduce it by $500K. You guys are looking for something for your projects? I watch the budget process. I read about what's happening here. Easily $500K. Cutting out and getting rid of the spurious and ridiculous prosecutions and what I call persecutions that are happening. Issue 2, this circle of ill. In fact, there's 3 slides later on explaining what I see as ill in this whole circle where nothing can be done. First thing that has to happen, my prescription to try to cure your illness, is to allow open information and questioning by yourself, the counselors. I know a number of you I've heard from talking to you that this is one of the major complaints. Residents come forward to you. Lots of residents are like me, but no, we're all ill. Got to stop that, got to allow the counselors. This isn't litigation with a developer over tens of millions of dollars of property. This is a resident where they came in our backyard, they're defining garbage, we're self-represented in court. We're already at a major disadvantage. We need help, not further turning a blind eye. Not legal tricks, which comes at the end, issue 8.
Mr. Van Decker, if I can just get you to pause for 1 second.
Sorry.
Your first 5 minutes is up. Someone
sorry.
from council wish to move a motion to allow Mr. Van Decker to finish? Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Tom? Another 5 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry.
I just need them to vote
This
first.
isn't going exactly as the practice.
All those in favor of allowing the presentation in an additional 5 minutes? So moved. Please
Thank you,
continue, but we're
Councillor.
going to hold you to this last 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and councillors. Let's move along quickly here. Okay, so open questioning, you need some sort of alternative dispute resolution. Throwing this into court with an unlimited legal budget, which effectively is moral hazard. I don't know if I have to explain moral hazard here to you, but that's what we have going on with the bylaw department. There's no accountability on the financial risk that's being entertained by having unlimited legal budgets. The third one is that there needs to be some sort of complaints process, internal investigation. I suggest that probably through the Property Standards Subcommittee would be the right way to have some sort of ADR or mediation. So don't just have the 30-day, you got to do an appeal. Look, once you start going to court, keep it open. That's what the judges do there. That's why we went 20 times, because they couldn't believe how ridiculous the bylaw officers are and kept sending us back to try to resolve it. They've got to take, the courts are way too expensive, way too adversarial. More in your expense than ours, frankly. This is a key issue. This is unbelievable that people are, that the bylaw officers are allowed to enter properties without a warrant, and for that matter, without a complaint. Really? They don't got anything else to do? They wouldn't respond to my complaints when I say there's illegal parking on our street, garbage from the school. but they'll take it upon themselves without a complaint to enter my backyard. We need to change the town of Aurora bylaws. Provincial building code allows you the ability to do this, but the town of Aurora does not necessarily have to do this. You could be the first one, you could be a leader, much like the leadership that taken on the OMB, and take a stand on this. It's only 5 provinces in Canada that allow this. It isn't across Canada. It's a very contentious constitutional issue that this is even allowed at all. Aurora should take a stand and stop this right away. You'd save a lot of money along the way and stop making so many citizens upset. Set clear bylaws regarding narrow complaint-driven investigations only. If there's any issue, you know how it gets solved in my neighborhood? Be the neighbors. We solve it, generally speaking. You know, we don't need, when they can't solve it, there's a complaint. Then we need the bylaw officers' help, not until then. This is important, is that there needs to be an ongoing tracking, part of the statistics and the reporting, not only at the cost, but where is the source and what is the disposition of a case. So you have a complaint, what's the disposition? No complaint, we decided to enter a backyard. I'd like to know how many times that happens, actually. Am I the only one? I want an inquiry on that and a Freedom of Information issue. 4, to the Standards Property Committee, the fact is we hand-delivered our letter with complaint to Standards Property Committee. Because of technicality in the bylaw that it'd be a registered letter, we reject it. This thing could have been nipped in the bud 3 years ago. Every legal person who looks at this, including divisional court judges, think it's ridiculous. You would have lost on this issue if we didn't beat you on other ones before this. This is the personal service is the gold standard. The fact that you have registered letters is nice, but it's a very uncustomer service friendly and frankly illegal thing. Vagueness of the property standard laws, it says appears, it leaves it in the bylaw officer's discretion, appears to not be usable. If there's doubt, I think the tie should go to the owner. If I say I got some utility that I'm going to do something with it, I don't need a bylaw officer coming in my backyard and telling me no. Issue 6. Bylaw officers in Aurora, at least, have no idea about the sustainability plan. They look at my yard and they see garbage. They don't see my upside down hanging tomato plants, my irrigation throughout, and all my perennials, what I've done to make my property sustainable, as you see. They just see garbage. They have no training at all in the sustainability plan. It is just plain harassment. There's no compassion, empathy, or consideration. This led me to have a heart attack in August. This crap that I've been dealing with. I was scheduled for a double knee replacement, and because they would not cooperate on trial scheduling, I had to change it to a single. And now I got a second 6 months of recovery to do, all because of the bylaw department. Lastly, legal tricks. We're treated like lawyers, dirty lawyers, frankly, in some way. The dirty tricks that are pulled, trying to have me taken off as an agent. That's the only reason why I'm speaking in front of you right now, because I'm not ill. My wife's ill. But no, because of dirty tricks, because they didn't know how to handle me, because I stood up to them for 3 years. So they tried to have me taken off as incompetent. They did. They were successful because I wasn't advising my father who had cancer, despite the fact that they agreed for it for 3 years. I now know the fancy legal term. It's called estoppel. You can't just change your mind on things like that.
1 minute, Mr. Van Decker.
Why? You got a resident, self-represented, going into their backyard without a warrant, and then you go through 3 years of legal tricks. Really? You'd think there might be a little mediation involved or something like that. A little bit on the other side rather than doing this stuff. I just started the legal tricks. I encourage you to ask me more questions about legal tricks. Lastly, I think you should actually have a pilot program, a recommendation of an action for 2 years to run at least minimum 50% of your cases through an alternative dispute resolution that are looking like they're going to court, and see what happens. I think you'll find you save a lot of money, a lot more positive feelings around here. That's about all I got to say now. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Decker. May I have a motion to receive the delegation and refer the matter to staff? Councillor Tom, Councillor Humphreys. Any questions or comments for the delegate? Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for coming tonight. I can hear that you've been frustrated for a few years, and I just hope that things go better in moving forward. And I do want to thank you for bringing forward this information. And there's some good points in there that I think we really should take a look at and see. So thank you very much. And it looks pretty incredible, your backyard, in terms of the solar panels. And I didn't realize that we had that type of significant solar-powered energy homes in town. So thank you for sharing
Could
that
talk
as
about
well.
that for hours, but anyway.
I have Councilor Maracus, then Councilor Tom. Councilor Maracus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Mr. Van Decker. Mr. Van Decker, thank you for coming. As Councilor Humphreys mentioned, I do think you raised some valid points through there. I know at the beginning of this term, I've actually inquired about right of entry powers for bylaw officers, and I agree, many residents throughout this town probably don't realize that they can enter into your property without a warrant. It just due to receiving a complaint can trigger them entering onto your property.
Without a complaint.
So I see your points in that, and I just wanted to state that you mentioned about that council gives a blind eye, puts a blind eye to it, and we say that it's illegal. I'd just like to say for myself, and I do believe the rest of my colleagues here, we do a lot of things, even though we can't speak to something specifically with a resident due to the fact that it is illegal. We do a lot of things. We do investigations. We do talk to staff. We do look at pursuing things, and we do that. We just can't speak to that publicly due to the fact that it is illegal. And we hope that residents can appreciate the fact that we do the work that's needed to be done behind the scenes to make sure that we can affect policy changes and make things better for all of our residents. But I do appreciate you coming out here tonight and stating facts and some, as Councilor Humphrey said, some valid points. And I can say that we'll look into these things, and hopefully we can make those changes that will make Aurora a better place for all our residents. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maracus. Through the chair, just in response to the issue of it's illegal, there's a few more slides in here which I believe you're going to be receiving. I think the key issue that I've discovered now in the circle of it's illegal is the budgetary control is the problem. That moral hazard that's there, that they control the budget without any prosecutorial discretion. A prosecutor can proceed because the town of Aurora bylaw officer tells them to, not because of prospect of success, not because it's reasonable, and that just further fuels the ill. And I really feel that they use this as a way to frankly silence any sort of dissent or criticism of them. In fact, the second charge that was filed at my wife, I believe, was purely done to stop me from speaking here tonight.
Mr.
As a
Van
matter of
Decker,
fact,
I'm
to
going to
stop me
ask you
from
to stick
speaking.
to the
The police
issues.
were here last time, barring us from entry, last council meeting.
Councilor Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Van Decker, for coming. I would just like to say, I don't think we received it. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me, but could you please email your presentation to members of council?
Yes, I can.
I just appreciate taking I know you have time constraints delegating, and so I would appreciate just taking a closer look at your presentation. So you have all of our contact info, I'm sure.
I'll use your Wi-Fi and do it in a minute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the delegate? Councilor Gartner?
Thank you. My comments are similar. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm very interested in the alternative dispute resolution. Do any of the other, you obviously have done a lot of research on this. Do you know if any other municipalities have that in place?
No, actually, from a bylaw point of view, not that I know of. I mean,
Okay.
I searched on terms ADR and Municipality Ontario and found things more to do with much bigger deals where land deals and they were in ADR and stuff like this. Nothing on bylaws when I added bylaws the term. So I really feel that the cookie cutter was made by, as many things as I understand in municipalities, set by municipal affairs, and for good reason, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and municipalities pick these things up. So pretty well all the municipalities have this in their bylaw and act, they enforce it because we have these powers. But just because you have these powers doesn't mean necessarily they should be used, especially if they can't be used for good.
Thank you very much.
Other questions of the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Decker. All those in favor? So carried.
Thank you.
Next up will be the consideration of, well, I guess next up is the presentations by the advisory committee chairs, which I've yet to see one, so I'll assume we don't have any. Looking around. You good? Next up is the consideration of items requiring separate discussion. First, sorry, Councilor Perry.
I would just state, because of Councillor Gartner's concern with regards to time, that we start with 1, 2, and then move to number 15 afterwards.
I'm comfortable with that. I was just going to poll the audience to see if anybody in the audience was here for a specific item. Item 2, so unless you want to amend it and then do 2, 1, 15. Councilor Perry? Yes, no? That's fine. Councilor Perry is putting forward a motion to proceed in 1, 2, and then bring 15 forward. Seconded by Councilor Maracus. All in favor? So moved. First item was pulled by Councilor Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move as is.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councilor Maracus.
Thank you. And I think this has been a very important process for the residents. We're talking about collaborating with the 6 northern municipalities and all of the advantages it gives us, mostly with respect to financial advantages. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Nadarozny. I'll get it right. Are there, thank you. Are there any disadvantages to partnerships like this?
Doug.
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this stage, and as everyone knows, I haven't been at this very long with the N6 partnership, but I've seen nothing but advantages of the group that gets together, and they're continually looking for areas beyond what have been identified here to collaborate. The only challenge that frankly has arisen from the N6 perspective in the 10 months that I've been involved in it is when 6 groups, 6 parties go down go on a walk together, and then all of a sudden at the 11th hour one of them gets cold feet and drops out in it. So it would appear to me that group has been cognizant of that, and as time goes on they're actually building sort of some safety nets in there so that if for whatever reason a change occurs and one group has to not participate, that it doesn't throw the cooperative out of kilter just by one person changing their mind or having a different perspective. So my experience so far has been all positive.
And there's been no issue with everybody doing their fair share of the work?
To you, Mr. Chair, absolutely not. The major projects have been moved around so that different municipalities take the lead. One of those you'll see tonight, the solid waste collection. The last time that contract came up, it was Aurora that led the exercise for procurement and negotiating and so on. And this time, to level the load, that was moved to Newmarket, and so a similar thing happens with other contracts as well.
I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Seeing none, all those in favor of receiving for information, so carried. Next up is item 2. I believe that was pulled by Councillor Gartner as well. Councillor Gartner, can you move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move as is. Seconder.
Councillor Tom.
So this is the award of recycling and garbage collection, and again, it's for the Northern 6 partnership. There's quite an increase in this new contract. It's $503,000. It's 28% higher, and I know the town is growing, and we're going to have a lot more garbage to collect. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Simonovskis, we had a pilot project. I think we called it a pilot project about backyard composting. So that would certainly take a lot of tonnage, if we could do it, out of the loop. Was that successful, and would we try and further that?
Mr. Simonovskis.
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, actually, it was highly successful, and it still is successful. The region was a partner in that initiative when we were doing the initial pilot, and we secured a number of new residents last year, and we want to continue that program going forward. The goal, and maybe Mr. Mayor may speak to some comments at Regional Council. I just know from speaking to regional staff, there was a lot of accolades with a number of initiatives, pilots that have been tried throughout the region, and our compost pilot being one that was identified from what I hear from staff. So very successful. If we can get a fairly high percentage of residents using that program, it definitely will result in reduced tonnage, which is going to improve our bottom line directly.
Thank you. And as we have a wonderful new communications person, perhaps that's something that we could, who might be blushing, I don't know. But seriously, I mean, anything we can do to reduce the tonnage is going to save money for the taxpayers. The other thing is, and I think there's a bill actually before the Ontario legislature about making manufacturers responsible for their packaging, the packaging that's left over that I'm not sure if it's that we can't recycle or that we do recycle or both. But where are we at with that? Because that would help municipalities a lot. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a complex question. There is a lot of work that's going on as part of the York Region Municipal Partnership around waste diversion. The region does have a representative through AMO that's actually lobbying on our behalf to ensure that we, the municipalities, both within York Region as well as within Ontario, have a fair access to funding, because a lot of that program is focused on actually having the full cost recovered for those materials. And the industry is of a different opinion as to how that collection program could be delivered. So I guess needless to say, it's a complex question. It is being followed closely by the committee that's formed around York Region municipalities as well as York Region, and any information that comes forward that's beneficial or informative to council will be brought forward when it's made available.
Thank you. Follow-up, Mr. Chair. And I don't know how I know this. It's either through you or CBC Radio. But I thought that one of the thoughts behind it was encouraging manufacturers to be a lot more innovative. And that would reduce their costs and reduce our costs. So I didn't realize it was going to be such a struggle. But is it a bill in front of the legislature at the moment?
Mr. Simonovskis? I believe she's referring to
It's part
the
of the
Waste
Zero
Free Act.
Waste Act.
Correct.
That's
yeah.
how I know it. Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor Dodd, would you like to comment? I know Mr. Simonovskis referenced some of the region.
Well, the region, and I don't have off the top of my head what in terms of what they're doing in terms of composting, but I'll look that up in time for next week. But certainly through their Smart for Ontario planning, they've been doing an incredible amount of work on waste collection, on diversion, on getting people to use organics on the green bin process. So they've invested heavily in the green bin process. And Councillor Gartner is right, it's complex in many ways. One of them is that tonnage on recycling is going down because packaging material is getting lighter. So we encourage people to have, to use less waste, but we're paying more for it because it doesn't weigh as much, because we're not getting as much back in terms of what we sell to recyclers. So it's a very complex process. So we're working at that. And certainly the region, and I don't want to guess the number, I'll have it for next week, but they're very high in their diversion rate using the EFW, the Energy from Waste Facility in Durham. So there's a fair amount of work going on, but I do have a couple of questions as well, if I may. Thank you. So when we went to the contract, and I don't think anybody said anything, well, Councillor Gartner might have been, when we went to the contract in 2007, 2009, I went to Turtle Island, and then when they sold it to GFL, there was some challenges, as we all remember, which was coupled with a pretty brutal winter, which exacerbated it all. It seems to me that they have managed to get back in line in terms of where they should be, but if we could just get a comment on that from Mr. Simonovskis, how they're doing, what they may have changed in their processes, I think that might give council some confidence.
Mr. Simonovskis?
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. With the development of this RFP, we were very cognizant of the concerns that we had experienced both through GFL as well as what our consultant had brought to the table with regards to industry trends within the solid waste sector. A couple of areas that we really focused in on were increasing our number of penalties, or I guess number of instruments that we have to our disposal to actually enforce the contract in key areas that we felt we didn't have as much strength as we could have used in the current contract or the one that's expiring this year. Another area that we increased attention was on the customer service element, so that the contract, the terms of reference for this contract actually had quite a significant requirement for customer service support, and Newmarket staff who have their customer service center were actually heavily involved in the evaluation and development of that requirement. And then we've also added some elements to essentially make this service a little more flexible for us as a waste collector, which includes battery collection. So that's another convenience that we didn't have in the current contract. And that the contractor would actually manage the bins so that we wouldn't have to store and basically use valuable space. So there were a number of elements, some that were directly relative to the residents, as well as other operational opportunities that we've improved in the contract, with the intent that the overall experience improves for our residents.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. That's all. Councillor Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Councillor Gardner touched on it. The price for 2018 is $500,000 more expensive than 2017. And I was furiously kind of flipping through the report, and so if Councillor Gardner asked this and I wasn't paying attention, I apologize. But my question is, and the report doesn't really say why it's $500,000 more expensive. It just says that it's $500,000 more expensive. So, I mean, unless I'm mistaken. So can you possibly just explain why it's $500,000 more expensive? Is it there's more houses to pick up from? I mean, is there a reason that it is? Is it, inflation? I mean, just give us a bit of information as to why it's $500,000 more than 2017.
Mr. Simonovskis?
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just provide information that's consistent with the amount of information that we can disclose with regards to the competitive nature of this process. Our contract is on a per ton basis, so all the costs that are generated in the RFP process are based on an estimated volume of tonnage collected for each material, and then the contractor would then quote their cost per ton. And that's one of the factors in the RFP process, being the cost factor and relative to the criteria for their actual submission. What we're seeing here, and we did ask our consultant to actually provide us with some comfort as to the rates that we're seeing within this proposal. We did expect, and actually a 30% increase was a number that as staff we were expecting, based on where the current contract rates are and knowing the savings that we actually saw in 2007 when that initial contract came in. And when you look at actual comparators of other municipalities that have similar models, these proposed costs are not out of line. So the consultant verified that we're not seeing a huge discrepancy in what you would expect in the industry. And we did have 2 compliant bidders in the process, so we did have a comparator to look at as well. You're right, it is an increase, a fairly substantial increase, but knowing where the current contract is and the anticipation now with these new rates is that, we will see new vehicles on the road, so this does include a whole new fleet. And there's also, again, additional services, so we're anticipating a higher performance service level. So these are some of the benefits that we'll see along with these higher costs.
Thanks for the information. As I mentioned, it wasn't in the report, so I just thought, if someone's reading this from the public and not at the meeting, they'd have no idea why the cost was increased if they're just reading the report online. So I think maybe going forward, just even a table explaining what more we're getting, or our tonnage estimates are increasing or whatever. It just better explains why that there's an increase, so that people understand what they're getting for their tax dollars.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. Councillor Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Simonovskis, it's been indicated here Miller Waste was the runner-up, and another company M-Track, or I'm not sure where it was. The other company was in there as well that you mentioned. What were their scores? Looks like the winning bid was 85 points. Just wanted to kind of gauge how close the other competitors were.
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the tendering process was controlled by the town of Newmarket, and the level of information that we've been authorized to disclose has been dictated by Newmarket's procurement process. So the information that you have in this report is essentially all that I've been authorized to release through the procurement cooperative. So I really can't say any more than what's actually written in the report from the evaluation perspective.
Through you, Mr. Chair, then again to Mr. Simonauskas, do you have any, I'm curious as to what reasons there could be to not be able to just know what the second or third place ranking or the points might have been. Can you fathom a guess as to why that can't be disclosed?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, what I can share is that the scoring for this process was done as an N6 cooperative through several meetings. It was all overseen by the Newmarket procurement staff. I can say that the combined score, both the ranking for the technical components as well as the price component, has resulted in Green for Life having a higher score than Miller, and that both proponents did meet those thresholds to be eligible. However, the higher score was for Green for Life.
I guess I can assume then that the other competitors, they don't know what their score was either then.
Mr. Chair, no, they don't. And again, if they're looking for that information, they would have to procure it through Newmarket.
Okay. On a different angle, in the States, waste management and recycling companies, they often, part of the contract includes the marketing to the public in terms of just the ecological benefits and the public marketing. It's a huge part of the value add. Was that ever discussed here, or is that being included in our contract?
Simonauskas?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, that was discussed when we embarked on this process 2 years ago, when we were looking at opportunities for efficiency and service level improvements. When we were discussing that particular factor, it was felt that there is across all 6 municipalities, that there was a high expectation from the community that they have access to the municipality. Even with this contract right now, we're trying to put more onus on the contractor to engage the residents through conflict resolution and service improvement exercises, but there is still, we've still allowed for direct engagement with the residents. That there is an expectation, and we wanted to provide that level of comfort to our community and not basically offload the entire service to the private sector and disengage as a municipality. So we were trying to find a right balance. The balance that we struck was to put more customer service responsibility on the contractor, but that we're still a partner with them in that process.
Councillor Kim?
Similar to other large contracts we sign, whether it be construction and here it's waste disposal, we've talked about in the past about performance issues with our contractor. In some cases, sometimes there might not have been any performance when there are performance issues, we can't penalize them or fine them or cancel our contract. Can you provide some detail around that in terms of can we impose fines on GFL if their performance doesn't meet or their service levels doesn't meet our standards? And what are there terms that we can cancel the contract for breach of contract?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. Our current contract, as well as this contract, has similar provisions, and there are penalty provisions that actually can lead to termination of the contract. And we as an N6, as well as council and CAOs, during the winter event we had where we had loss of service for a period of time, was very stressful, and we did explore the option of termination of contract. That's not as easy as it sounds, but we have added a number of additional penalties to close gaps that we saw in our current contract. So we've actually increased the options for penalty to tighten the quality of service in areas that we thought that we didn't have as much of a control mechanism as we needed. So there is definitely consideration for that, and there is periodic application of penalties when those service standards aren't met. And that's something that we do across the N6.
And lastly then, if we wanted to get out of the contract because that breach was just with us, can we unilaterally back out of the contract, or does it have to be all N6 or none?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, any one municipality can back out of the contract. The challenge with this type of contract is there's essentially a 1-year lead-up time to actually establish the service. So if there is a desire to move out of the contract, we have to essentially find a provider who can give us that service in a fairly short time frame. That was a challenge we had during the winter events that we experienced a few years back, where the option of canceling the contract may be a viable option, but you don't have somebody who's going to come in the next day and be ready with a fleet of vehicles and an operational plan that's going to go. So it's possible, but it takes a little more than just pulling the trigger.
Thank you. I have Councillor Marakis and then Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Simonovskis, I just have a quick question for you, Mr. Simonovskis. Have any of the other municipalities, the other 5, have any of them already voted on this? Have they already approved or denied this? Do you know?
Actually, I'm going to go to Mr. Nadarozny. I believe our CAO knows the outcomes of the other municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To my knowledge, the only one that's approved it so far is Newmarket. They approved it last night. There are 2 other communities that are bringing it to council tonight, in addition to Aurora. And I believe the other 2 are later this week or early next week, but they're all within about a week or so.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Councillor Perry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a little bit of ambiguity on page 7 of the report that I just want to make clear that I'm reading it properly. With response to the bag limits, through you to Mr. Simonovskis, Ilmar, we are not putting in a bag limit at this point in time. The figure that you've identified is a hypothetical that if we did move towards a 2-bag limit, we would result in an increase of $100,000. This isn't by any way what's happening. I just want to make sure of that.
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through Mr. Chair, that is correct. One of the harmonization opportunities that we discussed and presented to the CAOs was the option of actually harmonizing bag limits we thought might provide a contract advantage or a savings. Turns out that there was no difference from the contract's perspective on harmonization of bag limits. But there is, I presented this here because of the increased cost, that there is an option for some additional revenue in addition to tonnage reductions. We can maybe garner some additional fees.
Thank you, Mr. Simonovskis, but with all due respect, I don't think we're going to be leveraging those fees anytime soon. I think the residents of Aurora, I think rightfully so, from time to time need more than 2 bags. So, thank you.
Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you give us an indication of what we save by entering in the N6? So if, say, for example, we got a number of complaints and we said, okay, that's it. We would have to hire our own service or our own contractor and separate. Can you give us some sort of overall saving by entering in the N6, what it was before, just so we understand, or I understand?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only benchmark that I have as a comparator is the $1 million annual savings that was achieved from the previous pre-N6 partnership in the 2007 agreement. I would argue, knowing sort of the sort of the adjustments that we've seen with the 30% cost differential to this contract, that contract may have been highly competitive, and those savings may have been a little more than eligible, but that still was substantial. I think the benefits that we need to consider here are that we are smaller municipalities, so by pooling our energy and pooling our talent, we actually benefit from each other by offsetting the workload with regards to waste collection, creating redundancy across the municipalities, and creating a substantial enough contract that larger firms are able to bid competitively. Those are probably some of the considerations that I would.
That's exactly what I thought. So in haste with the waste, we have to consider that is something to be considered. If you can. Now, do we have some sort of metrics of complaints? So, of course, the highest number of complaints we would have received was during that freezing rain, almost disaster. But from that sort of point, the responsiveness and number of complaints, do we have any sort of metrics going forward with that?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair, we do track complaints, both internally and through GFL. I'm just trying to recall the most recent numbers. It's less than 200 a year. It's not substantial. Again, it depends on weather. It depends on certain events that may happen. When we initiate sort of the leaf bag program, the first cycle or two might result in maybe not so much complaints as inquiries. So there is some seasonality to it, but the volume of complaints are not problematic, and the contractor is held to respond and address concerns that are brought forward.
Thank you. And my comment basically is I can't remember the last complaint I had as a councillor, someone saying this is unacceptable. Of course, that was a far different matter 3 years ago, but if everyone in the N6 seems to have the same sort of complaint and metrics, we're in a good situation for saving money and the service is provided in a reliable way. So I'm just sort of adding that comment. As far as I can see, if I'm in support of moving forward with this, and only because they've established a good service record, they have been responsive, and the odd time I do call, they seem to be able to. There's someone live on the phone that is responding, and that's sort of what we want. It's apart from snow plowing, I think garbage collection are the two main services that people gauge how we're doing. So, thank you.
Councillor Gardner for the second time.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Simonauskas. So if I'm a resident and I have a problem and it keeps recurring, and I call into the call center and I don't get satisfaction, and the town has to come out, my garbage keeps getting forgotten. So the town has to come out and pick up my garbage and do whatever they need to do to make me happy. That's a cost to us. Do we get to go back to GFL and claim that cost back, or is that just a situation that's not going to happen?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that's a situation that shouldn't be happening. Again, we have penalties if they're not responding to calls effectively, if they're not going out and collecting. There's always special circumstances where the material that's been put out isn't appropriate, and we need to get engaged as far as educating the resident and mediating a discussion. And that's a role that we're happy to play as part of our customer service piece. But the contractor, from the service delivery of the primary collection of garbage, blue box and green bin, they are fully accountable for that collection and responding to community needs.
So as a follow-up, if we incur costs, do we get reimbursed from GFL? I can't think of a circumstance, but it's a general question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't have a provision that we recover costs, but we do have penalty provisions. So if what they're
Okay.
doing is costing us because they're not doing their work, then we penalize them for that. And in cases, it can be thousands of dollars depending on the infraction.
Thank you. So we're not out of pocket.
Correct.
Thanks.
Councillor Kim for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, as I was talking the first time, you know, gradually, just something about this didn't sit well with me, and I think unlike other RFPs that come before us, I find myself approving something or making a decision on a few $1 million of the service on information that we don't really have. I'm sure that we're given the same piece of information as members of council in the other N6 communities, but essentially what we're looking at here is we've done an internal investigation, and we decided that Green for Life obtained the most points. But in the outside world, I find that we have a matrix of here are the competitive bids, here are the services that they're providing. You check off what they're providing and what they're not providing, and at the end, the dollars and cents. And so when we evaluate the bids, we can actually see what we're getting for the dollar and what we're not, because it's hard to compare the winning bid with the next winning, with the second or third rated bid, because they may have come in with a higher cost, but they may provide other services that maybe the winning bid didn't offer. And those are the things I'd like to see, just so I can feel good that we're spending, $2.3 million wisely. And it's not to say that the staff at Newmarket are not looking after our best interests, but as we're looking after the public purse, it would be nice to have a matrix of what the bids were and what they were providing, because not every bid's the same. And it's always nice to have members of council be able to provide some more feedback and provide or ask more questions. But I mean, in the report here, all we know is the winning bidder has 85 points. Talks a little bit about the reason why one or all of the bids were a little bit more expensive because of FX. Some cost-saving opportunities. So it really really brings about information that is not really core to the RFP. And so I just hope that in the future, there's a little bit more information so that we can have a more lively discussion and ask more questions, so that if we're going to be spending $2.3 million, that we can feel good that was, in our opinion, the best offer.
Mr. Simonauskas, are you able to circle back to the town of Market and see if there is any additional information that perhaps can be provided in advance of next week's meeting to answer some of Councillor Kim's questions and or other members of council's questions? Is that even an option?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I want to say yes, there's an opportunity, but what I would like to do, if I could, maybe just defer the question to the CAO from the perspective of the CAO's position on this, recognizing the procurement and the information sharing aspects of it, if that's all right with Mr. Nadarozny.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I'd like to leave it that we can look into this and get back to council. We, out of respect for the process that all the councils have agreed to going into this, we really do want to defer to Newmarket, their legal counsel, their procurement process. So I would want to the opportunity to consult with my colleague in Newmarket and make sure that we don't run afoul of their process. But whatever we can do, we will do.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion on the floor? Carried. Next up is item 15. Actually, it was Councillor Tom that pulled it. Sorry.
I'll put it on the floor.
Do I have a seconder? Councilor Maracus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is excellent, and I appreciate working with the soccer club. I think this aligns with a lot of stuff we wanted to do anyhow, and it saves us a whole whack of dough in the process. And so just so I understand it, because the report is talking about the tender, but there's more pieces to it, obviously, because they're going to be moving into the SARC for their clubhouse or using the changing rooms, and then there's going to be converting Shepherd's Bush potentially into a multi-use field. So just so I understand and everyone understands it, on page 5 of 6, it talks about the positive budget variance of about 400 grand, as opposed to a multi-purpose field. We're going to just a soccer field at Stuart Burnett. And in the report, it talks about how any savings can be applied to the increased costs associated by enlarging Shepherd's Bush field and lighting. So I just wanted to know how does this go into a reserve fund that we just draw on later for the capital project, or can you just explain how that 400,000 moves over, I guess?
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, would like to make just a little correction for that. So the tender is for award of a multi-purpose field. So the contract came in $406,000 under budget. So that's where the savings are. We are not able to have discussions with the contractor until there's award of tender. That then gives us an opportunity to then negotiate a different cost for the work. The tender was called as a unit price contract, so it allows us to pay for only the units that we are asking for. So if the field was 1,000 units and we are only building 800 units, we only pay for 800 units. And we haven't gone into those negotiations yet because we're not permitted to talk to the contractor until we actually have an awarded tender. At which point we will then spend time talking to the contractor, finding out what cost savings would be associated with that. At the same time, we would then be entering into discussions entering into discussions with a designer to design a multi-purpose field at Shepherd's Bush, giving us some idea what changes needed to be made at Shepherd's Bush in order to accommodate a multi-purpose field, putting some cost estimates to that, presenting that to council, and asking for pre-budget approval in the 2018 budget in order to complete that work. We would then commence work on perhaps a reduced field at Shepherd's Bush, at Stuart Burnett, I apologize, while then moving forward with tender documents for the construction of a multi-purpose field at Shepherd's Bush. Upon completion of the work at Stuart Burnett, we would then commence work at Shepherd's Bush in the spring of 2018. So that's our process that we're looking at right now.
Crystal clear?
That was a great explanation, and certainly made it clear for myself. So then the budgeted amount under budget 400,000. So the savings are on top of that.
Correct. This field, if we go with a normal field or just a soccer field instead of a multi-purpose field, there will be a savings.
Great.
I can't tell you what those are right now, and it's not appropriate to then talk to the contractor unless we actually have a tender, which is why it's before you.
Thank you. Like I said, I just wanted clarification for myself, and that makes it quite clear. And then the last piece is that with respect to the soccer club, obviously this is just the tender, so there's going to be a report coming back with the impact on the SARC, and I mean, are they just using the change rooms, or is there going to be changes made to the SARC? And if it's coming back in a further report, that's fine. I just wanted to know.
Mr. Downey?
It is mentioned in the report.
We will be providing a report. We have a document from the Aurora Youth Soccer Club stating that they would agree to just a soccer field at the SARC, and that they would be using the change rooms at the SARC, and it would satisfy their needs for their semi-pro team. So we want to make sure that's confirmed, because there's no point moving forward unless we can satisfy that need. If it can't be satisfied, then we will be reporting that back to council one way or the other and moving forward in some direction.
Councillor Tom?
Great, thanks. And I know this will probably come back then, but I know they were looking for a clubhouse and change room. So with this proposal, they're just going to use the change rooms at the SARC. There's not any extra space or anything like that, right?
Mr. Johnny?
Through Mr. Chair, I would not be recommending a clubhouse. This is in lieu of council committing to a clubhouse. So there's no point in moving forward with this if there isn't some type of cost savings. So the soccer club must commit to using the change rooms at the SARC prior to us committing to building just a soccer field there. If that's not the case, then council needs to be made aware of that.
Great. Thanks very much for the information, Mr. Downey, and at least from my perspective, I think this is a pretty good deal, so good work, thanks.
Great. I have Councillor Maracus and Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think, I'm all for moving forward on this. It's been identified in our master plan. I just, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Downey, I don't know if you should get the credit for this, but I'd like to commend, I guess, you and your staff that you guys were able to get a lower price than 2012. I think that's an achievement in itself. That doesn't normally happen. We don't usually get a lower price from 5 years ago, so that's great. And then as far as the, looking at making it a dedicated soccer facility or soccer field, I'm looking forward to that report, and I do think that it's a great opportunity to align, a lot of different sports into one area, and for us to create a hub for that sporting activity, and bring in some more people from outside the area and visit our newly Sports Hall of Fame. So I think it's an excellent opportunity, and I'm looking forward to seeing that report, and I'll go a little bit more in depth and talk about that when we get that report. But thank you.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. I think this is a question for Mr. Elliott. So it says on page 2 that third paragraph, the available approved budget for the project was $1,500,000. So that means that the council of the day approved $1,500,000, and was that money put aside? And if so, we wouldn't have used it. So is that in a reserve fund getting interest?
Mr. Elliott?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not exactly sure what the course of action between 2012 and now is, but I can certainly update council with an email tomorrow.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. I've put you on the spot. So the question, if the question could be general, then, if we approve, if this year we approve in a budget $1,500,000 and we don't use it, I'm trying to remember your last report. Does that, what happens with that money?
Mr. Elliott, I think Councillor Gardner is referring to that capital report that you often bring up.
That's correct. Through you, Mr. Chair, the unspent capital, it would be considered as unspent capital money. Unspent capital money earns interest in our investment portfolio to the benefit of the general operating budget of the town. Eventually, we would close the report and return that money back to source, where it would earn interest to the reserve funds that it came from. So if it was DC money or if it was R&R money, it would begin earning interest back to those reserves instead of the general operating fund.
Thank you. Follow up. So it wouldn't go into the Parks Reserve Fund.
No.
For future use.
Well, if it came from the Parks Reserve, it would go back to the Parks Reserve.
I don't have any idea where that came from, but okay. So it goes back to wherever it came from. And there may not, I don't think there was money in the Parks Reserve for it at the time anyway, so.
Mr. Elliott, you'll send us an email with some details this week? Great. Any further questions? Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Elliott, it looks like we're committed to a multi-purpose facility at Shepherd's Bush. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, actually, this report commits to a multipurpose field at Shepherd's Bush, at Stuart Burnett, not at Shepherd's Bush.
All right.
Council has not made that commitment at this point, so this is a multipurpose field at Stuart Burnett Park.
But part of this strategy going forward is to make that, designate that the soccer and move towards a multi-purpose at Shepherd's Bush.
That's correct, but council has not made that decision
I
at this point.
understand that clearly. But it is, we have talked about it, so it is sort of a strategy which we will be able to talk about once we've gone this way.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely.
And if we were to expand on the Shepherd's Bush, we have to have a bigger footprint to accommodate moving from a strictly soccer field to a multi-purpose, because there's end zones and other factors involved.
That's correct. That's why we would need a new design for that park. We know that it is more than likely going to need additional lighting. We know it's going to have an impact on one of the fields on the north end of Shepherd's Bush. So it may have an impact on the seating. We're not sure. So that's why we'd want to go through a design to make sure we came back to council with all those design considerations.
And if we were to realize a saving at Stuart Burnett, because we can't really say, but if we were to go that way, we could use those savings to invest in the capital, whatever is going to cost us. We can't say if it's the same because we don't know. But some of those savings could be moved towards the capital investment of converting Shepherd's Bush to a multi-purpose.
Through Mr. Chair, yes, that's what we stated in the report. So any savings that we've identified in reducing the scope on this particular project, we're recommending be transferred to the capital project for a multipurpose field at Shepherd's Bush. But as I say, council hasn't committed to that yet.
So my comment is that if we are having to invest money to convert Shepherd's Bush, and part of it is the base, or what I'm going to call the footprint, would we consider employing that at the Stuart Burnett in the event, say 30 years down the road, we were thinking of reconverting or anything along those lines, so we wouldn't have to incur those costs? So while you've got grading and all that going in, mind you wouldn't have to put the marking in the fields and the turf in, but if it ever did.
Mr. Downey?
Is that a thought?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure I follow. Are you suggesting that in the future, if we put a regular soccer field at Stuart Burnett and we wanted to, in the future, convert that to a multi-purpose field, will we be able to do that? Is that what your question is?
Well, not quite, but yeah. The question would involve exactly what I'm saying. So it's hypothetical, and maybe I'm a bit off, but if you only had to make a soccer field and it was smaller, when you went to do that footprint at Stuart Burnett, saying it's successful and everything goes along, while you were grading, you made a bigger platform or base so that if you did move and stretch the field down the road, you wouldn't have to go in and do all those rudimentary grading and fill and all that sort of stuff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that could easily be done. Certainly, Stuart Burnett can accommodate a multi-purpose field, so we already know that.
Okay.
So we could easily grade the area for a multi-purpose field, but only put in a regular soccer field. So then, in the future, we wanted to look at expanding that. That could easily be done.
That answers my
that
question.
could be done. I don't know whether it could be easy, but it
No,
could be done.
it may never come. You may want to use it for benches or seating or whatever. but-
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions? Councilor Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following on Councillor Abel's questions, I mean, if we want to have the most flexibility possible and we want to regrade that field for a possible future multi-field use, we would have to add that to the contract. That would be an extra cost. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. If council would like us to continue to make accommodation for a multi-purpose field, even though not putting in a multi-purpose field at Stuart Burnett, we can do that. And we can report back to council on what the savings would be within the existing contract. We will also be reporting back to council on the conversion or the reduction of a multipurpose field to a regular soccer field without making accommodation for a multipurpose field in the future. Those would be greater savings realized in this contract that could then be transferred to Shepherd's Bush. So any accommodations for future construction would be looking at a reduced amount of credit towards Shepherd's Bush. So you're going to have, so we'll give you both, But my recommendation will be if you're moving towards a standard soccer field, let's do that. And then at some point down the road, if you want to look at expanding, we know the footprint can work. We can then come back and deal with any construction costs for enlarging that field, not unlike the same process we're going through on Shepherd's Bush right now.
Thank you. And I must be missing a link here because the motion, I like that answer, thank you. The motion before this, before us, is to approve the construction of a multipurpose synthetic turf sports field at Stewart Burnett Park, but in fact, that is not our intention at all. So
I think Mr. Downey explained earlier that he can't have that conversation until the decision's been made, but I'll go back to Mr. Downey just to clarify.
Through you, Mr. Chair, two things have to happen. First of all, I can't have a conversation with the contractor until he's actually got an executed contract. So I need council to award a contract to this particular contractor. Secondly, council has not made a decision with regards to reducing this field and increasing the field at Shepherd's Bush. And until that's done, we're moving forward with, we need to move forward with this recommendation. This recommendation allows us to start the process so that staff can write a report and council can then give some consideration. If council decides they don't want to move forward with an enlargement of the field at Shepherd's Bush and continue on the construction of the multipurpose field at Stewart Burnett, it's well within your purview, and we will move forward as council wishes.
Thank you. I understand that it's complicated, but when we pass this next week at council, and we probably will, it's saying something that really the intent of what's written in the, it's different than the intent of what's written in the report, is my point. And would we have to do a reconsideration if it's less than 6 months?
I'll go to our clerk.
Well, maybe we could know for next week. I mean, to me, this is very strange because we're talking about something that is completely different from the intent of what the motion says. It might be confusing to the public.
I hear from the clerk, and she's happy to take a look at it and respond to it next week. Mr. Downey would like to comment?
If I might, I am moving forward, or staff are moving forward with preparing a report for council being able to consider putting a multipurpose field at Stewart Burnett. Okay, this recommendation is not tying your hands. Okay, so there's no recommendation that states we should be doing that. You haven't even given that any consideration at this point. So I'm doing this, and you're aware that I'm doing this, but you're aware that there's going to be a report coming forward that you are then going to be able to vote upon. I'm not asking you to vote upon whether or not you agree or disagree with building a multipurpose field at Stewart Burnett and a multipurpose field at Shepherd's Bush and a regular soccer field at Stewart Burnett. I'm not asking you to do that at this point.
Councilor Carter, anything further? No. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carried. Next up is item 6. I believe Councilor Kim pulled that one.
Thank you. I'd like to move this as is, please.
Do I have a seconder? Councilor Perry? Councilor Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In reading the first page of the report, I just found the verbiage quite confusing. Looking at the 4 points of recommendations, number 3 and 4 would saying the contract term is 2016 and 17, so for 125,000 and then 170,000 for 2017, and given that 2016 is almost over, just by reading this, I'm wondering why we're even looking at the 125. It seems like that's up for debate, but when you read further, you read that it's not. Page 3 with the matrix certainly clarifies and gives the reader everything one needs to know. So just in the future, if we could just kind of clarify the verbiage, because I didn't quite understand what the ask was, whether it was for 2016 and 17 or just 2017. And in the executive summary in the first bullet, says this RFP provides for contracted services from 2016 to 2020. Given that, it sounds to me that we have an agreement with the service providers for the next 5 years up to 2020, and yet for 2017 we're already being asked for an increase. And from our experience, I haven't seen anything like that where there's already an increase. Is there, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Simonauskas, is there a fee schedule from 2016 to 2020 that we're, like a base fee schedule that we've already established? And so is this telling us that if for 2017, that 2017 established fee is insufficient, so we're asking for an increase today for 2017?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, that's precisely the situation. This is another unit price contract, so we have hourly rates for the two vendors that were procured through the tendering process. And what we're looking for 27, and the other thing too that's important to recognize is that a PO, and maybe Mr. Elliott can speak to this if need be, a purchase order when opened is actually open for the entire term of the contract. So this value of the PO will increase every year as we add the next year of the term of the contract to it, which could be confusing as well. So hence the table on page 3 to outline the approvals for each year. And what we're looking for 2017 is additional work that both contractors can deliver based on anticipated maintenance that we're looking to do for the 2017 year. Sorry.
So then are we, so I guess with every year, 2018, 2019, 2020, because this is a unit-based contract, we can expect another increase or an increase in the ask for that year's service.
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The contract provides for pricing for each of the years, but we also look at our workload to see how much we'll actually utilize a contractor. There was a report prior to this where we actually had 3 vendors, just a little history. We had 3 vendors that we initially selected for mechanical services. One of the 3 vendors was not performing to our standard, and we basically withdrew them. We canceled their purchase order and put the work on these 2 contractors. So again, if there's performance issues, we do manage that either by canceling the contract or shifting the workload.
Thank you. And so I guess that's just the nature of the beast for unit contracts. And if we hadn't signed a unit contract and we signed a fixed contract, I would imagine that there's a higher premium so that the vendor would have some flexibility and they won't operate at a loss should there be more servicing needed for that year. I'm assuming that's, from our perspective, that's the reason why we would rather go with a unit contract than a fixed one, because it would have been a much higher cost not knowing how often we'd be using their services. Is that right?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through Mr. Chair, I think the germane comment there is that we cannot precisely define the work. So by having a unit contract, then we can base it on how many hours of effort that the contractors provide us, which gives us flexibility to manage how much we use them. So for these types of contracts, whether it's mechanical or electrical services, where there's maintenance involved, these are a more efficient contract for us, and they're fair for the contractor too, because he knows exactly what his workload will be based on our demands.
Councilor Kim?
Great. And last question then, and I'll wrap this up. Given that we just finished our budget system, how do you budget this then? I would imagine that you would probably ask for more than you need so that we don't have any variability during the budget year, and that's when I think we have seen in the past a surplus, in which case we would put back into the original, or put it back to the reserve. Is that the way the order of operation has worked?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through Mr. Chair, I believe that's correct. I mean, if the question is, have we budgeted for this in 2017, the answer to that is yes, we have. So these amounts are already contained within our 2017 budget. And we make an effort to look at the workload based on, the last year or two's experience with what's happening within our facilities to forecast what our budget needs are and then adjust accordingly.
Great, thank you.
Mayor Daw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Simonauskas. Mr. Simonauskas, did I understand correctly that we had a third contractor whose performance was not satisfactory? So we terminated their contract and then added that to one of the presumably done lists? Did I understand that correctly?
Mr. Simonauskas.
Through you, there was a report to council that actually described the change, and what it resulted in was splitting that third person's, or that third company's work between the two vendors. So we basically split it 50-50.
Was that in 2016?
I believe so, and if
I'm sorry, I don't remember that particular report.
Yes.
So then what would be the additional 100,000 to Dunless? And I'm sorry if I've missed that.
Mr.
Yes.
Simonauskas.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, if you look on page 2 of the report, in 2016, we had a number of unexpected breakdowns, and that's where a lot of that effort was consumed.
Right, I'm sorry I didn't phrase my question clearly. Was that additional work that the other contractor would have done, or is this over and above what that third contractor might have handled? I'm just trying to...
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So it's over and above.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's over and above.
So one of my challenges, and Councillor Thompson brought this up with respect to the water meters, is that we seem to have jumped substantially in pricing without a lot of background, quite frankly. So if we put the 100,000 to Dunless aside in order to cover those emergency repairs, which I agree that we need to compensate them for that, but we're increasing the two budgets for Carmichael and for Dunless substantially without, quite frankly, a whole lot of background information. So how did you come up with that number? Where is our confidence level in terms of, are you being more proactive in terms of figuring out or predicting, pardon me, what will fail? Could you help me with that, please?
Mr. Simonauskas.
Through Mr. Chair, the challenge we have is a backlog of maintenance within the facilities in particular, and we've seen that in a number of years. And we had this discussion even with the SARC, which we consider our newest building, which is now almost 13 years old. So what we're seeing, and part of what will be coming forward to council as part of the facility condition assessment, is sort of a review of all that infrastructure. This request is based on what we're seeing in our costing for 2016 as we're moving to the end of the year, and how we're going to accommodate those maintenance needs in 2017. So the budget was increased in 2017, recognizing that we are essentially over budget in these elements in 2016. So other than providing specific information, maybe this is something for discussion as part of the 2017 financial review. We can dive into those details. But I could bring some more specifics on our actuals if that would be helpful for council. But that's how we as an internal organization establish those forecasts.
Mayor Daw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think taking it to the Finance Advisory Committee would be advisable, because it's a little disconcerting when you hear that we're behind on maintenance, that we're not up to snuff on maintenance. So I think that's worth a discussion. Thank you, Mr. Simonauskas.
Other members of council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Last item is item 13, and that was pulled by Councillor Humphreys.
I'd like to, I'm not sure if I want to move as is. I have something I'd like to recommend as a change within the minutes, if possible. So I'm not sure if I can move as is, or if somebody else would like to.
Perhaps we could start off by moving it as is.
Okay.
With Councillor Perry, seconder. As is. Councillor Maracus, the floor is yours.
Reviewing the minutes, I have, there's one in item number 2 of the minutes, and then there's one further in for later. But So I was curious because this property, I think the owners came forth to say that their home was listed, and I was on the Heritage Advisory Committee before, and I absolutely respect everyone on the committee. There's some amazing knowledge, and I'm very thankful for the expertise that we have on the committee for sure. But I'm curious, and I'll probably need Mr. Muno's help on this one. The owners, it looks like they came to look to see if they can delist their property. And from what I understand, the property was recommended as, kind of a low score, so not worthy of a heritage designation. So from what I understand, when that happens, it's removed. The only reason there's a house heritage listing is for a potential designation. And if it can go either way, it can either be delisted or made heritage. But to have it remain listed, I'm just curious as to understand, why that is, and then I'd like to recommend something after that.
And just to be clear, we're talking about item 2, the house at 111 Mount Metcalf Street. Mr. Ramuno, can you speak to this?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. That's correct. The applicant did come forward with a request, an application to have his property at 111 be removed. The evaluation committee did score the property, and we submitted a report to the Heritage Advisory Committee. It did score low. A recommendation was for the committee to consider removal. Committee at that time chose to recommend that it stay on the list. As you know, we do have a registrar of 600, over close to 500 properties that are listed.
Councillor Humphreys?
Okay, thank you. So I've never seen this before, and I understand why. So a couple of things. If it's not worthy of heritage, then I do want to see it delisted, because I don't think it really makes perfect sense to keep it listed. Although I do understand, we want to protect our heritage. I want heritage areas. I particularly am concerned because this area had the opportunity of being a heritage designated area, and the majority of residents turned that down. So this wouldn't even be an issue, but it is. And it's only fair that the owners have a right to come forward just as much as if they wanted to list it or delist it. And if the ratings that we use typically indicate low, I really don't see why we would make this property sort of a, I don't know how to say this, but I would prefer to see it just the listing removed or make it heritage, one or the other.
Councillor Humphreys, did you want to put an amendment on the floor?
I do, but I'd like to hear what others have to say. But I do want to put that amended, maybe, well,
We'll come back to you then. Councillor Marcus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was hoping the amendment would be on the floor, that way I could speak to it, but I'm kind of that thought is we did earlier in the term, and actually I don't think it was that long ago, we had one come before us, and it was kind of the same instance where they asked to be delisted, and the committee said, no, leave the listing. And, I think that when someone comes forward and asks to be delisted, I think that the determination that has to happen at that point is that we have to look at it and say, do we designate it or do we take it off? I don't think it's appropriate for us, once someone comes forward and asks to be delisted, for us to turn to them and say, we're not going to designate it, but we're going to leave you listed. I think that's it sends the wrong message, I think, at the end of the day. I think if it's worthy of being designated heritage, it should be designated heritage 100%, because I think all of us would like to, we want to protect our heritage assets. I think we can all agree on that. So I think that if we look at this, and I looked at the evaluation, in my mind, I don't think it meets that criteria for us to designate it. So I'll wait to hear what Councillor Humphreys puts forward as an amendment, and I'm sure I'll be in favor of it, as she's probably looking forward to delisting it. So,
Thank you. Councillor Tom?
I don't mind waiting for the amendment either, so.
Okay.
If there's no further discussion, I'll turn to Councillor Humphreys to put forward
Mr.
an
Chair,
amendment.
I would like to put an amendment here if we can delist the property.
I'm just going to turn to the clerk for a minute.
So this is a recommendation from council, so you don't have to agree to the recommendation. You can just vote on the other matters.
Go back to the staff
And then not accept that recommendation, and then they can put another motion on the floor.
So the clerk is advising that the best way is then to vote on the motion in front of us, but to separate it. And if it's council's wish to not approve item 2, then the motion then could be put on the floor. That's the opposite direction. So
Like if you just want to receive their recommendation, you're just receiving it, and then you're putting your own motion forward.
I'll let the clerk speak to it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what's in front of you is the minutes with the recommendation from the committee. So you can receive the recommendations. It doesn't mean that you're going to approve them. If you just want to receive the recommendations, and then council may put its own motion forward. I do think you probably are looking at the other 2 items, though, and want to approve those items. So maybe it's that you're approving item 1, 2, and new business motion number 1, and then receiving item 2 for information. And then once that's gone through, you can then put a motion on the floor to deal with item 2 if you wish to take a different direction.
Sure, let's do it.
Councillor Tom, did you want to speak? So the clerk's advised us to receive this as information, as minutes, but then we will deal with them from a secondary perspective.
Yeah, so my understanding is we're receiving everything but the second recommendation, and then voting against that. It's confusing.
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, this should be clarified with the new process in
Oh, yes, I
January
can't
when
wait.
we have the new committee reports, because this whole process, I agree, is confusing. So what you have is the minutes in front of you, which you'll be just receiving the minutes. Then you have item number 2, sub 1, which has a recommendation here. So you actually want to approve that recommendation from the committee, if that's council's will. Then item 2 is the one I believe that you have an issue with. So you want to pull that out and just receive the recommendation on that one. You're just receiving it. That doesn't mean you're approving their recommendation. And then the new business motion, if you approve of that direction to staff, you're going to approve that. So you can vote on them separately if that helps clarify what you're voting on.
So I think we're going to turn to the clerk and ask her to hold our hand while she puts the motions on the floor for us individually, and then we can vote. Unless there's further discussion about it in general, I'll have the clerk separate them and put them on, and then we'll vote clear and provide some clarification. Or did you want to speak?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just speaking to the report, this came to the Heritage Committee, and I chair the committee. Councillor Gardner sits on the committee, and so the committee recommended this. It's not something that I agree with. I think like Councillor Maracas, that I think the list is there to hold. I mean, it's in the report. It talks about non-designated and listed on the Aurora Register, subsection 27, Aurora Heritage Act. We don't have to get into it, but the intent is to have a listed property so you don't demolish it without knowing what you have. But once you've had the time to look at the house and decide that you don't want to designate it, keeping it on the list only ensures that you're going to have to go through the exact same thing over again, because they'll put if someone does put a request to demolish in, you have 60 days to say, well, we're going to designate it or not, and then you're back at the same process. So if we're not going to designate the house, it shouldn't be on the list. We should either designate it, or I think the people's who own this place, their request is reasonable, that if we're not going to designate it, that it shouldn't be on the list. And so I'm in favor of moving forward however we decide, but certainly I'll be voting against the second recommendation.
Thank you. So the advice is to split the motions in front of us. So the first one that we'll be dealing with is number 1, that the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting minutes of November 14th, 2016 be received. All in favor? Carried. The next one will be 2 sub 1, which is that the heritage permit application be approved to permit the demolition of a 9.25 meter squared accessory structure, and that in the removal of the accessory structure, the owner minimize any damage to the main building. Any questions or comments on that one? All in favor? So moved. Next is 2 sub 2, which is the property in question at 111 Metcalf Street. The motion is that it remain on the list of Register of Properties of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion's defeated. And finally, the new business motion number 1, that staff investigate opportunities for signage for the Northeast Heritage District. All those in favor? Approved. Would it be appropriate, Madam Clerk, at this time for Councillor Humphreys to put a motion that's contrary to the one that was here on Metcalf Street to remove it? Councillor Humphreys?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask that item 2.
I think the motion
I'm
can
sorry.
simply be that the property be removed from the list.
Exactly.
Councillor Perry is seconding it. Any comments on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. Sorry, I should have said opposed, but I didn't really see any. That concludes. New business, general information. Councillor Maracus, may I start with you?
Yes, you may, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I just have 2 quick items. First one, parking on Yonge Street. I had a call from one of the businesses, and there was some issue with being ticketed, and and while what I did find out is that people are, even though they're allowed to park, they're only allowed to park there for a 1-hour time limit. Personally, I mean, if we're going to allow parking there, then I think 1 hour is a bit restrictive. I mean, if you're going to have lunch, you're going to have to eat pretty quick, get your bill, and get out. And well, there's an opportunity. You could get a ticket. So I think that it's a bit of a hardship on some of the businesses, and you could lose a lot of repeat customers. I mean, once they get a ticket, they're going to say, I'm not coming back here. If I go in, and you're also stopping someone from going to the restaurant, coming out, maybe walking over to one of the other shops, taking a look inside, right, and wanting to spend more than an hour there. I think if we restrict it to an hour, I don't think that's great. So I didn't know that it was 1 hour. So maybe if we can look at changing that to 2 hours. I don't know, whatever it is. Maybe staff can come back with something. So through you to Ms. Van Leeuwen, I guess, if something could come back to us. And we can just take a look at that number and what would actually work overall. I know that we're looking at a parking strategy overall type of thing, so maybe if that can be part of it, and if we can maybe do that one sooner rather than later, just because I do think that 1 hour is very restrictive for our businesses in the downtown core.
Ms. Van Leeuwen, perhaps you could provide some context over the next week in terms of how long that's been in place, typically what's been happening, and then to address some of the concerns?
Absolutely, I can do that. Yep. Thank you.
Number 2?
Yeah, so the next one actually is I had some residents coming and have some complaints with our leash-free dog park on Industrial Parkway. There's some concerns that maybe we're not keeping up our end of the bargain, so to say. With that being said, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Downey, I know we've had some discussions, and I know that there was a report last term with some options of possibly changing the agreements and allowing for maybe council to maintain that park on a somewhat better basis, but it would have some cost implications. I'm just wondering if we could get that report through you, Mr. Chair, back onto the Parks and Rec Committee to take a look at, and then possibly at a future general committee meeting, so we could take a look and maybe move forward in a different direction than what we currently have.
Mr. Downey?
Through Mr. Chair, be happy to do that. We're presently working on a draft response. I want to pass it by the Chief Administrative Officer prior to submitting it to members of council on a little bit of the history with regards to how we got to where we are today. And if council wishes, our previous report from 2012, and suggesting that's the one you want to be looking at, I'm happy to do that. Do we need direction from council in order to put that onto the agenda, or do I simply put that on the agenda?
I can turn to our clerk and ask if the chair of the Parks and Rec Committee can put forward items for the agenda. I believe they can, so.
Okay, great.
Maybe I'll take direction there. But I do think it's the appropriate place, and we can have the conversation, and then council can weigh in based on whatever recommendation the committee has. Anything else, Councilor Maracus?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Councilor Gardner.
Thank you. I forgot to ask a question last night. Some residents asked, what's happening with the snack bar that's part of the washroom facility at the town park? And I didn't even know that there was a snack bar in that structure. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Downey.
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, there is a snack bar there. We built it several years ago. We have had difficulty having an operator of that particular facility, so it hasn't been in operations as a snack bar for quite some period of time. I think that as part of the discussions with the cultural precinct and some of the changes that we are contemplating within Town Park, I think that's something that we should certainly look at, looking at use of that space and utilizing it as a snack bar. I think people would probably enjoy that, particularly in the winter season and during our events.
Thank you very much. I agree with that, and it hasn't been in the mix at all, as far as I know. So let's put it in the mix for Town Park.
Thanks, Councilor Gardner. Mayor Daw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, we have the tree lighting event tomorrow, and rumor has it that Santa will be there. That's it. And reindeer, yeah, we have live reindeer in Petch House. And lastly, just to let everybody know that it seems that photo radar has been a really big hit. Everybody's right behind it 100%.
Oh, what kind of tree is it that's being lit, Mayor Daw?
I believe it's a spruce.
Okay. Councilor Abel? Councilor Humphreys?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just about parking again. So there was some complaints about idling cars at Our Lady of Grace and concerns about parking. And today there was a big blitz. There was 3 bylaw officers ticketing everybody who was outside the school. So the parents are furious. They're like, I'm here to pick up my child, and there's not enough places to pick up the child, and they're little ones, 4, 5. They can't walk home. They don't bus them. So we got a problem, and I don't know. Maybe there's something we can do to look at that area. Always comes up. So maybe there's something we can do rather than ticket everybody, trying to get their kids. So I think if we can have staff take a look at that area again, and I think work with the school, because I think the school needs to provide more drop-off zones or something, because it's a disaster. They have a no parking area, and they need that area to pick up their kids. So I don't know why it's no parking.
Would that be something the Traffic Advisory Committee could look at?
That could be. We're meeting next week to talk about that, aren't we? So yeah, we have to. It's getting. There was something else, but I forget.
Councilor Tom. Nope. Councilor Kim. Councilor Peary.
This may or may not fall under what we typically talk about, but just recently, the chair of Durham has been diagnosed with cancer. I was wondering if Mr. Mayor, I serve with Chair Anderson on the FCM board. I know that Mayor Daw has worked with Roger through the LSRCA, so I was wondering if a letter could be sent on our behalf, wishing him a speedy recovery. So that's the first. And then I'm sure everybody's aware, today's an anniversary that pretty tough for Canada as a whole. The attack was perpetrated by someone who today we would consider to be on the alt-right of the political spectrum, who was trying to put an end to feminism. And just with all the comments that are going around, different levels of government, women politicians are often attacked unfairly because of their sex. So I would just like to thank Councillor Gartner and Councillor Humphreys for serving and for representing Aurora so well. And I'd just like to remind you that you never stand alone. So thank you very much.
Nicely said, Councillor Perry. Before I go back to Councillor Maracas, our clerk actually has something she just wants to bring to our attention.
I just have an item. I think this was the item that you were going to bring up, Councillor Humphreys. We have a correction just to the Trails and Active Transportation Committee meeting minutes. Those were passed on consent tonight, but we were made aware just before this meeting that the motion, maybe we could put that on the screen for you. New business motion number 1A, it said that the proposed adoption to demolish the former library at 56 Victoria Street, and it was missing, and the former senior center at 52 Victoria Street. So that's just a correction we've made to make sure it's clear, and just wanted that noted. Great.
Thank you. Councillor Maracas, you had more?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. It was something that Councillor Humphrey says about the parking and the ticket blitz that happened. Through you to Mr. Van Leeuwen, was that, I don't know if I heard it correctly, was that because of anti-idling, or were they issued parking tickets?
Ms. Van Leeuwen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would be parking tickets.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but my understanding is if you're in the vehicle and even though you're parked, and if it's running, you're actually stopped, you're not parked. So therefore, how can you get a parking ticket if you are stopped? That means we would have to have no stopping signs. Is that correct?
Ms. Van Leeuwen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would have to check into that exactly. There may be no stopping signs. Bylaw Services does work very closely with the schools on these parking-related issues. They're often safety concerns, so I would have to have a dialogue with Bylaw to understand and also just do a little bit of research if it's no stopping versus no parking.
Definitely. So I guess so if we could find that out, because if it's just no parking along those areas, then I think that parents have no problem then stopping and picking up people, because all they're doing is stopping. They're not parking, so therefore they shouldn't be getting ticketed. So unless there's a no stop sign, then it's an issue that we need to look at.
No, I can tell you.
We have no closed session items this evening, so motion to adjourn. Councillor Tom, Councillor Maracas, all in favor. Meeting's adjourned.